Good evening to each and every one of you, and thank you for taking your time out to come today. Um, what I would like to do is just talk about why we are here. I think you can all hear me, right? I don't need this. Let's talk about why we are here, and I also would like to take a few minutes to actually share about who we are. Sometimes we kind of get that question asked in terms of getting the right relevance. So why are we here? C2FO has been engaging a lot of corporate customers across India, of course, across the world. But as we keep talking to many leaders all over, we see that different organizations, different leaders with different mindsets reach out to some of the everyday common challenges in very different styles. It could change by leadership mindset, it could change by the industry in which they work, or depending on what their corporate priorities are. But this whole topic around supply chain and how do they think about liquidity into working capital flexibilities to the supply chain is kind of approached by different organizations very differently. Potential possibility of how we can bring together different leaders in different forums to kind of bring together their ideas and help share, because we think there is a potential opportunity to cross-pollinate and exchange some of these best practices and learn from each other. That's the intent of us trying to do these kind of sessions, and BW has been a great partner to help us bring all of you together. This is the first time we're doing something like this in Chennai. So we're also learning and experimenting a bit. So just pardon us if something's there is a learning opportunity. But we've been very frequent in doing it across the Bangalore's and the Mumbai's and the Delhi's. Let me speak a little bit about who we are. Right. One last question is, so what's C2FO? You've not necessarily heard our name in many forums, or probably never. We are a 14-year-old company. We are founded in Kansas City, out of the United States. We presently operate in 160 countries, and we are the world's #1 early payments platform. So what does that mean? Our interest is to simply help generate and provide liquidity into supply chains. So if there are suppliers working with large buyers with credit terms and pay terms, our idea is to help these suppliers get access to their payments well in advance of the due dates, of course in exchange for a premium, but create a win-win formula where the supplier takes the goodness out of the liquidity back in their hands, and the buyer gets to deliver a lot of value into the supply chain, but while also delivering some ROI, which makes it meaningful and risk-free. We do this at global scale, like my friend just called out here. Ever since we started 14 years back, we've done about, the updated numbers, about $260 to $270 billion of early payments that we've done through our systems. Last year alone, we've clocked close to $80 billion as a single standalone year. Of course, every year we are growing anywhere between 50 to 100% compounded. So last year was about 80 billion. This year we expect to cross about $120 billion in total payouts. I think by end of 2025, we expect to cross a total of $1 trillion of payouts. Right? So that's for us being able to do it at scale and volume. Why are we doing this? And what's our ulterior motive and vision that we want to drive? Our interest is to help businesses and organizations across the globe get access to liquidity and working capital so that they get to do what's important for their business. Like every large company has different priorities and visions, this is our vision. And we would do whatever is necessary for us to work in that direction to enable it. So that's who we are, right? I want to spend a little bit of time on giving a little extra context. There's this whole G20 summit, right? I'm sure everybody's heard about it in the news and media. India has taken that leadership. If you've seen the G20 policy document, which was published for this year, India and the global leaders have published a white paper which talks about how is the criticality of supply chain directly linked to the success and growth of businesses in their markets. Of course, C2FO was quoted as one of the leading companies in the world helping enable some payment mechanism into the supply chain. and very specifically that troubled environment of supply chain within that supply chain in the MSME segment. So there is a study which the G20 has done, and there are many other studies many governments have done, but the common theme is for every dollar or every rupee that you spend paying into the supply chain on time, not delayed, on time or earlier, 10% of it goes directly into influencing the employment that is generated by that organization. So, we did some math. We've done $260 billion of payouts, early payouts globally. The cost of human capital in India is very different than the cost of human capital in Europe or Australia or US. So that value of 10% is probably a little different by different markets. But when we've done some rough math, we figured that we have helped create 57,000 jobs in the world through the work we do. Now that for us is deep value, and that continues to excite us to do what we want to do. Back to the topic today. Our interest of bringing this leadership topic, this thought leadership conversation is about whatever we do, how can we help continue to think about supply chain related challenges being more resilient, and talk about what's important in that space. And then talk a bit about how do we think about sustainability and why that plays a critical role in your own organization and your growth priorities, and how you see in your scenario, in your relevance, an interconnection between sustainability and supply chain. Yeah, sometimes people struggle to understand what's the crossroad going to look like, but what we would love to have is have some kind of a conversation in that space, and hopefully that's going to fuel some new learning and new thought processes for everybody in the room. So thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to a great conversation, and obviously shaking hands with some of you right after. So thank you for being here.
We are talking about a very critical topic, and if you look at where India stands right now, the conversation is relevant because we are trying to become the global hub of manufacturing, and we have, of course, advantages. If you look at some of the points that we have the demographic dividend, we have a robust demand, we have an expanding middle class expected to be second largest in the global scheme of things by 2030. So the thrust on Make in India by the government and overall is a reality. So in this context, supply chain becomes a critical aspect. And how do we ensure the current market scenario, the current global politics that plays out, unforeseen events do come up, but how can companies ensure a robust supply chain mechanism? And of course, the need for capital is always there. So we have our esteemed panelist. Let me start with Mr. Sankaran. My first question to you, sir, is if you look at manufacturers, of course, have a deep tiered supply chain, and of course, at times, lack of working capital becomes an issue. In your experience and as a thought leader, how does a fintech marketplace matching funders to vulnerable vendors provide optimal capital solutions in this kind of a scenario?
Second is, I'm not from Axle India. I am from Automotive Axles, and just more because both are different entities. I am from Mysore. I just introduced myself, and I'm a CFO for Automotive Axle. We are manufacturers of axles and brakes for the medium, heavy, and commercial vehicles. So our mother plant is in Mysore, and we have plants in Pantnagar, Jamshedpur, and Mysore. So we have been well connected with large supplier base. Some of them are A-class, well established and renowned supply base, and largely, if you see medium and small enterprises, the large piece of the supply chain, which is in and around Mysore, Bangalore, and some of them in Chennai. So I just talk about in terms of fintech. Really, my experience, my outlook to them is about they are gearing up, but they are far away from the reality in terms of connecting to the technology similar to what C2FO or any other people are doing. The first point of question is what's the cost of my funding? And so that's basically is what is running in their mind. They don't mind paying higher interest, take the money upfront rather than looking for the right solution. And most of the MSMEs are basically still far away from the technology. Still everybody, a lot of people are doing 50 crores, 100 crores turnover type of thing. Some of them well organized among them, they are prepared, open-minded to adopt technologies. But most of them are how I can able to get the cash quickly across the table. So whenever we say, one of the proposals, we also received C2FO for quite some time, and we have finally evaluated and we dropped it because it's about the participation, the whole supply chain perspective. So we have our own system of discounting to suppliers. When we make them to come on board and they're saying that no, we are not ready. We don't want to do on the board on all these complex things. So by and large, what they are basically looking at is about easy and it's very simple to operate with rather than going to complex things. When it comes to the working capital needs are concerned, they are basically hand to mouth. The last COVID time and the last 2 years, last 1 year has been pretty very good business as far as automotives are concerned. The 20 and 21, 20 especially a very bad year, and but we kept our supply chain, most of them on hold by giving some kind of capital advances and all this stuff, so to make them untidy and be available for us the market goes up. So today they are definitely much better in terms of volumes, but the test of the water really comes in the business volume goes down, especially the medium heavy commercial vehicles. It'll go up, if it drops very badly. So that point of time, definitely that will definitely hit the balance sheet. So my opinion, they will be, as of today, they are far away from the technology adoption, and secondly about their willingness to adopt technology is also that not so high. Somewhere the selling point in their mind is far away from the reality. So this is what we are seeing it from our supply base. So that's my answer.
Give me your initial thoughts on access to working capital and how fintechs are really solving a real problem. Your initial thoughts on this.
Yes, I'm Stevenson, and I'm part of Danfoss Group. Danfoss is a Danish organization with around 12 billion euro, and in India we are at the others 3,000 crores. We are the manufacturers basically. So coming to your question, access to the working capital, especially from the supplier perspective, I could see a lot of challenges for the suppliers. When we have the big suppliers, they are having their own working capital facility limits with the bank and all. But when we come to the medium suppliers and other, the SMEs, I'm hearing a lot of challenges from them, and they are not able to, meet the demands. And I could travel a little more in this. Before that, I want to give a perspective where every one of us who are here knows about the impact what it can create if the suppliers are in trouble. And I could see from my experience, the availability and reliability, of our products towards our customers. It determines our, the business prospects. And I can also see that a lot of reflection comes from the business, and where for example, if the availability is just 50%, just why I'm telling an example, then it is not only that the 50% of the business we lose, but also we have the ripple effect where there are some business adjacencies around 15 to 20% they will lose. And as well, on top of that, there has to be some inventory to be piled up, to meet the any supply risk and all. Then the asset manufacturer, we are having a huge trouble in having our working capital being piled up as well. Now, what I want to relate to our suppliers, when if these are all happening because some of the suppliers could not supply products on the time. And from this perspective, I have got a lot of requests from the the vendors through our procurement team. What are the supports that we can give as a manufacturer? And then there are many facilities available with the bank, something like a vendor financing. There are many corporates where they are not interested to, sign a contract, on behalf of the vendors. And Danfoss, is very clear that we don't do it, with the perspective of not to influence any of the bank or the vendors to go in one particular direction. And coming back to the fintech, now I see it's a very good welcome, that is coming in the market. Then that could help. And why the small vendors are not able to, get the working capital, and we all know in this profession, a leading nationalized bank, and they say that they could, they could only release 72% in the last year, 2022, of the working capital demand loan that has been, and they could only release that much in spite of a lot of government push, that they have received to release the loan for the SMEs. Why? Because they have a lot of norms, and we all know that working capital gap where they see maybe 75% they will release, and beyond that there are many questions that comes, and the bank will not be interested, right? And then the credit rating, that is also another area. The suppliers will not be in a position to access all the bank because of the credit rating. They will not be able to do it. And you think about the startup, and we as a nation we are talking about the startup organization, how it is going to be backbone for the development in India. And then for startup, if they go and approach the bank, they say that, oh, where is your stock statement? I need 3 years stock statement. And that means that there are a lot of such difficulties. And when you look at this, I could really see that from the perspective of vendors, it is a really welcome measure, if such fintech market players could come in and help them. And we can see there are many platforms, for example, the peer-to-peer, really, is one of the, venues that, that could help, in this process. And from this perspective, I could see that, I also hear that, our Prime Minister Modi ji also described, we are very strong, in getting into the fintech, and then we will be the startup in the fintech itself as a nation, right? And also, I'm hearing that our adaptation rate over here is more than 70%, more than the average of the global average. So these are the things that are really impressive, that could help the supplier base. From that perspective, the manufacturing organization could really help. This is what I could share right now.
Of course, I think the ease of access to capital that fintech platforms like C2FO, I think that itself is a great example, of how you ensure, and how Mr. Katari also said how they have impacted lives. So 57,000 jobs have been created. So of course, and timely capital itself means a lot. It can have a ripple effect. I want to go to Mr. Pavan Chelamkuri here. So I'm building on what the gentleman before you said, because in the absence of immediate short-term financing for vendors, in your view, what value would a fintech platform serve for making a seamless collaborative tool for manufacturers and trading partners, becoming a seamless collaborative tool?
Yeah, so myself, Pawan, I'm working with Isuzu Motors as General Manager, Supply Chain and Purchasing. So in the panel, probably I'm the only guy who's representing supply chain. And thereby, I would want to do justice for supply chain, right? So with all the people around me talking from a finance and fintech perspective, yes, I think there is a lot that can be done together. Right now, first and foremost, I think the suppliers in India specifically, what they need is even education of how to handle their finances. More often than not, I see that the capacities and the working capital are very much linked. The moment a supplier goes into a spiral of capacity shortfall, that's when he gets into the mode of a firefighting system. And when during firefighting, what happens is he runs shorter batches. He wants to please every customer of his, and while he's running shorter batches, he's losing efficiency, and efficiency loss is also meaning that he's making loss at the end of the day. So no matter how much of a working capital is being pumped into the system, basically he's not making the contracted profit along with his OEM. So this becomes a spiral, and it's very difficult for a supplier to come out of this spiral when he gets into that mode. So thereby, I first and foremost believe that it is important that an education of the supplier is mandatory. I mean, it could be a misguided, creamy layer for a fintech company, because if a supplier is mismanaging his finances, then it's a good pseudo good for a fintech company, but nevertheless you might not get it back at the end of the day. So first and foremost, I think it's important that the suppliers are educated on this front. And second thing is, and as part of education, what also happens is, from a supply chain point of view, more often than not, supplier sees his finished goods as money lying at his end. So he doesn't want to keep any inventory lying, but whereas he should also be in a position to be able to see that the inventory is actually helping him build a dam between all the unforeseen exigencies that are happening. Today's supply chain is in a most vulnerable situation or circumspect situation, because you have everything hitting, and it's very difficult for someone in supply chain to be sitting here for the next 1 hour and then not thinking about anything else. There are n number of issues, that's not happening, this is not happening. So inventory is very significant to shield a supplier from the unforeseen events that are happening around, and thereby inventory is not necessarily working capital lying at his end. So if he maintains inventory, then he's also making sure that the risks are being protected. And one thing I can recall from another role that a fintech company can play is money tracking is always successful. Whenever we had one issue in one of my previous companies, we were losing the returnable bins, returnable tracking pallets. So the easiest thing that we could do is put a value to each bin, though it did not have any value. So the moment we put a value to the bin, then we started tracking, and then people started tracking these bins back, and then we know that the empty pallets or the empty returnable containers were being tracked, and we were making sure that this is coming in. So the point I'm trying to make is, when the fintech company joins hands and be able to put a value then the tracking becomes easier, because we want to track money but we don't want to track material. Right? That's another area that I can see that we can work together. There are other couple of things that we worked on payout production. So sometimes the suppliers, the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers don't get the confidence. Payout production is a concept, most of you must be already aware, wherein every car that is getting produced, we already have a bill of material that is aligned with the vendor. And this bill of material, based on the number of cars that we are producing, we used to then keep paying the vendors on the agreed value. So we didn't have to worry about the inventory, we didn't have to worry about whether there is any rejection, we didn't have to worry about whether there is any excess usage or shortage, because that was already fixed. So if we produce let's say 1,000 cars in a day or in a week, and then we used to 1,000 into the amount that we have agreed is what used to get paid to the vendor. So this kind of, but not all vendors were ready to trust and then come forward for such a kind of a system, because that would make things a lot more easier and simpler. Whereas a fintech company can come and play a role here as well. That's another role that I see. So one is education. Second thing is, assign value to the material so that tracking becomes easier. And third thing is come and play the role of a mediator in terms of making the process easier. So these are the areas that I can think that a fintech company can play.
Thanks, sir, for sharing this elaborate answer, and of course a lot of insights in this. Mr. Fatin, your initial comments on availability, when you break down the traditional system of access to funds and you come in a way that is easy and there will be a capital pump, your initial thoughts or any examples that come to your mind where it has really helped the supply chain maintain its course, its efficiency?
We don't look at its liquidity. See, generally what management, or even when we talk about performance of the supplier, we talk about whether he's profitable or not. When we only look at the liquidity position of the company or the supplier, then only we will get to know whether he is doing it considerably well or not. See, what happens here is, take case of small companies. They may not have access to capital. It could be because of lack of professionals or understanding of financial markets. Whereas in case of large corporates, they'll be able to access to all banks and financial markets. So, for them, if they don't get capital, even if their product could be profitable, if they don't get access to liquidity, it could put their whole manufacturing setup in juggle. So, in this scenario, if you look at the fintech platforms, it provides a really good platform to these small companies where they don't have to run to the banks. Again, the challenge what small companies face here is they will not be able to get funds from the banks on the backup of their supplier, all their clients. So when they come to these platforms, they can get funding based on the back of their customers. For example, you take case of large corporates like Ashok Leyland. Bankers can bank on the credit rating of the company and they can provide funding to the small companies. That helps them in getting the requisite funds to operate the company. So this is what I feel in this scenario, C2FO kind of platform can help in providing liquidity to these small companies.
Ranganathan sir, let me change I want to go to my next, the often spoken, that India is becoming the next big manufacturing hub, which it is, and we were having a discussion that it's not because of low cost alone. Low cost is no longer the factor. It's of course the focus on quality. So as the West looks at shifting offshore manufacturing bases to India, and given India's focus on Make in India, indigenous manufacturing, in this context, how do durable manufacturing supply chains become a key driver of competitiveness?
Very predominantly, when I started my career, whenever we are exporting from India, more often cost is become a primary criteria for being the Western countries, coming to Asian countries like India, China, and all this stuff. But as a new beginning, COVID has become a lot of learning. Okay, now the entire West or anybody is looking at it's not about the cost, but more about the dependability. That's called as trust. Okay, even the cost is okay, little higher is fine. Okay, but can we go to a dependable source where irrespective of things that they can do a genuine and good business. That's probably India has gained a lot of momentum into that in the entire. I think thanks to the government and the way the downturn has been well managed. We see that India has been looking at very, very positively, and the new area has been explored. So as far as my company also, if you really look at it, the last 1 year, the tremendous focus from the globe in terms of sourcing from India, not only direct manufactured by us, but also directly from our sourcing partners directly to them in terms of procuring from India. It more or less about more than 60% the sourcing has improved. Our exports more or less it's about doubled as compared to the last year. Definitely when it comes to I know nowadays the delivery and the cost, delivery and the quality is given. If you are not producing quality, you can no way go to near to them. It depends on which industry you serve. The quality parameters, it's probably it's more stringent as you go to aviation. It could be slightly better in automotive axle, but automotive industry. But by and large, quality is what the customer needs. So as long as you are there and you are there to the business. So if you really see, a lot of our supplier base is still supplying directly to the Western parts. Basically, the consistency, even though the various ups and downs, how well you are managing it and making sure that your delivery commitments are given. So that is very, very, very important, the whole aspect of it. So my personal opinion is, but irrespective of the challenges the SMEs has, they have to, once you want to do domestic is a different ballgame. If you want to go to exports, it's a different ballgame. You need to upfront and straight and looking forward that you need to have your funds and make sure you are there to the customer to deliver the goods on time. So he is not going to bother about where you're getting your funds from and what you're going to do with. So as as gentleman has rightly said, when it comes to our supplier base, we have a global sourcing team sits here. We'll make sure that we make a valuation of them, make sure that they are available to them. If they are not financially sound, we don't even recommend them. End of the day, we can't screw up the global supply chain. And if he is financially weak and he's not able to manage his finances properly, that's basically is very, very important here. So, and when it comes to domestic, as he rightly said, the larger corporates, because of the limitations, the way the SMEs are managing the finance, okay, not that they don't know finance. Sometimes I find them they're more sharper than us. Not everybody, some of them has a very, very genuine into this. The way they manage the financials, they may not be having an upper hand in terms of getting the right kind of funding from the banks. The point is that more often we know the reality we have to manage. A lot of corporates come forward that we'll take a larger credit from the bank. We ensure that we leverage our credit to the supply chain, make sure that we support them properly. So we divide the supplies in two elements. One is dependability, larger dependability as far as exports are concerned, and make sure that they're reasonably financially well and well managing the business. And definitely we leverage our credit, make them they have been successful. So this is what my experience here.
And it's heartening to know that we are moving from the perception of being low cost to dependable, and that's a significant shift. Mr. Balakrishnan, same question to you, that if you look at the ecosystem of and our ambition of becoming the global manufacturing hub, what are the larger bottlenecks that you see? Of course, one is where fintechs are coming in, but if you could give us a couple of more, from your leadership perspective, do you spot any other issues, bottlenecks that are stopping us, or we have to address them on priority?
When I see the bottlenecks, from the perspective of the business is on the one side, and also we already discussed about the facility, how we are, and then another side on the inventory, how it is getting piled up. And I could touch base one area on the inventory, that is one of the challenge. When you look at, for example, in our organization, we have a couple of business segments, and there are some business segments which are based on the order. And then whenever there are shifts in the order, and then our inventory is getting piled up. And how I am looking at, in such a case, then when the leaders are really are in a position to make an analysis of how to dilute those inventory, if that being the case. And we are automating our inventory tracking system in such a way that it links with our future orders, and then how we can dilute when we are able to see the inventory aging, and then what is the availability, and then we could see that based on the availability of order what we can do, and then whatever is not possible to get diluted, then how we can plan for those dilution. And this is the one of the the challenge how I'm looking at. And another thing what we have already touched base from the supplier perspective, our colleague has rightly mentioned about the education and also how they are in a position to plan well. For example, fintech can go and help them, in these cases. But however, how they are, making a profitable growth in this, how they are efficient, and how they are able to structure their treasury policy internally in such a way that they are able to, focus their funds in the, right businesses. So this is also another thing. We also talk about the fintech, what are the advantages that it can have, but you have the flip sides of that, and how that is going to be addressed. That is also another thing is what we see that, and there are some compliances matters also being discussed, and then that also comes in the forum. So these are the quick challenges how I am getting it with respect to the fintech.
Mr. Charankuri, your thoughts on India making resilient, supply chain, ensuring it stays, it anticipates risk, stays its course. Are we there? I mean, are we doing enough on that side, according to you?
Well, I don't know if I can say that we are doing enough. But definitely what I can say is India is capable of building a resilient supply chain. I mean, which other country can have so much of diversity other than a country like ours, right? So, in spite of the challenges that we have, I mean, even to reach to this place, we need to overcome a lot of traffic diversions, by the way, and then there was a traffic as well. But still, if you could make it here, I think that's what we have grown up with. So coming back to the point, supply chain, resilient supply chain, yes, because Make in India is ideally not make for India, but it is Make in India, and then we're going to export it to various other places. That being the case, so that we should be able to develop that resilient supply chain. And I think the main difference that we have here, or what we should address, and where fintechs can also help is, fortunately, unfortunately, we need to look at the Chinese model that we have right now. But China is not India, and India is not China either. But Chinese, the scalability that the suppliers have in terms of being able to cater to larger volumes is very high. In India, we have smaller players, but many players. We need to address that part of it, because the supply chain, the biggest challenge is, of course, the forecasting model and how we are able to forecast the demand. Sometimes it's very high, and are we able to meet that and leverage on those available demands? That's the question. That's what we'll address, whether we are able to make a resilient supply chain or not. So scalability is one that needs to be addressed, but I think we should be capable of doing it.
Yeah, but we don't want to be emulating the scalability which is not coming with dependability, right? We have charted our own course, and we hope to match those numbers. Mr. Fadeen, your comments on, if you look at the Make in India, of course, the manufacturing, supply lines and supply chain, are there any addressable issues that you can spot, you can think of?
See, when we look at sustainable supply chain in India, government has been promoting by giving incentives to all the suppliers. Like if you look at it, PLI scheme which they are giving it to all the manufacturers in India, that should help in promoting the manufacturing sector in India. So with this way, we should be able to promote manufacturing in India, diverting some of the manufacturing sector from China. See, if you look at it currently, take case of semiconductor. Okay, there has been a bottleneck of supply. We can tap those opportunities and set up plants in India. If you look at, we have already been setting up plants in India. This way, whenever we feel there is an opportunity, we should be able to tap this opportunity and make it positive in a positive way. So we should have a sustainable.
Though you touched upon this earlier in one of your answers, but I want a more elaborate answer on this. What are the advantages of having access to working cash flows, and tell us your thoughts how this accessibility builds efficiency and productivity in reconciliation of manufacturer needs, and how it builds resilience in trading partner relationships?
Access to working capital is, as I mentioned, the initial thing is what most of the SMEs are looking for easy funding. Easy funding, matlab the process they want to simple and easy to operate with. That's what we are seeing it in our about 600 plus supplier base. Close, most of them are SMEs, and definitely there's a good scope that fintech can play a good role. Somehow the inner belief into them that fintech can make a difference to them is probably still not sitting in their mind. That's definitely one of the platforms we wanted to adopt very consciously within us. We found that the change management is one of the biggest challenge we faced, and then we created our own methodology in terms of make sure that the supplier base is not impacted because of the working capital. So when you talk about sustainable thing and access to working capital, is basically the OEMs or the larger suppliers has to play a key role. Today, again, a lot of SMEs are very, very small, maybe 20 crores, 30 crores turnover. Their ability and to quickly adopt the working capital by themselves, standing on their own credit, is very limited. So we have our own methodology when you're bringing a new supplier base to the system. We put them into first 2-3 year differential pricing based on the volumes. Then we stabilize the pricing after 2 to 3 years. Once they've proven the quality as well as they get the regular volumes from us. So first 2 years to 3 years of testing time for them. We give them again differential pricing that the volumes up to this is the price and below that is the normal price. So we give the flexibility to them. Once they stabilize, then we go up to the normal pricing to them. See, this is one of the way we make them that they are not really impacted in terms of the working capital as well as in terms of the profitability.
Yeah, the access to working capital, that is the thing that we have already touched base, and I could see that this is a backbone. When you look at for the small suppliers and SMEs. Whenever they are stuck, in the working capital, as I was discussing even earlier, that how the bank can, not serve because of many restrictions, and then definitely this fintech role, I could see that how they can participate better in the working capital, and by that way it really helps on the availability and reliability, both for the suppliers and also for the manufacturers. At the end of the day, the entire customers, the end customers are also not getting impacted. So that's how I see this.
Wonderful. Mr. Chelamkuri, your thoughts, and also how would the fintech platforms, how would their role pan out from here on, according to you, when it comes to providing capital, and making it easy?
Okay, first with respect to the access, I think that there should be a controlled access. I mean, if it's a free access, then there is a loss of efficiency, and so that is not good. So there has to be a limitation. Neither too short is also not good, too much is also not good. Coming to the role, as I said earlier as well, I think I see fintechs as more of a facilitator, because right now there is a need for the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers to grow and grow big. However, I think facilitation in terms of educating them, facilitating in terms of their own growth paths as well. So that's a huge potential, especially in a country like India, where we have many small players than the few big ones.
Fatin, so I mean, of course we're talking about the excess, but tell me, in your view, how does it build efficiency, productivity, and strengthen the partner relationships?
Access to working capital by all these small companies is very critical. When we look at fintech platforms, how could they help all these SMEs? They will help them understanding what is their standing in the market. They may not know what is happening in the market in terms of their access to working capital. So fintech platforms like C2FO can help them understand at what rate at what quantum they can get those funds from the market. So this is what I feel.
We are wrapping up the panel. If there's any question to any of them, we can take one question. Else, I would like to thank all of them for taking their time and joining us on this first panel. Thank you everyone. So thank you, sir, for joining us here.
The topic's really on sustainability and sustainable strategies for a resilient supply chain. You know, I'm talking to some of our friends earlier today and talking to a few other people outside. Many of us have different definitions of how we think about sustainability. I've talked to a few people who talked about really around ESG strategies. Is ESG important? Absolutely yes, but is everything ESG equal to sustainability? I think sustainability is a lot more bigger. Are you as an organization thinking about how you're doing, what you're doing? Is it sustainable for you, for the environment? Not just from an environment point of view, from a governance and a social point of view, but from the point of view of your financials, your supply chain ecosystems, your customer communities, the different other partners who come and work with you to help deliver what you think you're delivering, right? That concept and meaning of sustainability has a lot larger meaning than just ESG. Similarly, if you want to switch over to how do we think about what is the definition of resilience in our business context? Everybody has a different business model. Today we've got representation from Boeing, there's Hyundai, there's Staff A. I'm sure this definition of how you think about resilience could have its own connotations. Right? So what I would love to do is just start by getting a sense of how each of these leaders are thinking about what it means to them, and then get into a few questions in terms of how we think about it. So first question I would like to really ask Ashwini is, could you really help us define from your point of view and your business mindset, your business footprint, how do you think about sustainability and those strategies, and what do you think of resilient supply chain, and what do you think are the interconnections?
First, in terms of the footprint that we have, and in the networking session, I was a little surprised that a lot of people are still not aware what Boeing does. So possibly we're not doing a good job, getting to the media and talking about it. So we source about $1 billion every year in products and services, and some of the most critical parts are manufactured in India. We have a joint venture with Tata's in Hyderabad that makes the Apache fuselage, and they just delivered the 737 vertical fin. Some of the critical wire harnesses are sourced from India. Some of the critical structures, you would have heard about Apaches and Chinooks. Most of the structures are delivered from India. We do forgings, we do avionics, we're doing actuation, we're doing thermoplastics. So we're growing in the footprint. Now, before we define what sustainability and what resilient supply chain is all about, it is also important to understand that in the aerospace and defense world, it is possible that you have single sources. And very often, the capital or the non-recurring expense is very high, so you can't develop multiple suppliers. So if you have to have a sole supplier in a region, you have to make sure, and in the previous panel, somebody said it's all about trust or dependable supply chain. So resilient supply chain, in my mind, is about having a trustworthy supply chain. It's a measure of health of the supply chain. And there are two factors. One is about resisting the disruptions. If you read some of the reports in the media, they'll tell you that every 3 years there is some level of disruption, whether it's pandemic or economic disruption and so forth. So the first element is the ability to resist the disruption in the industry. The second piece is, after the disruption is over, your ability to recover. And third element is you have to deliver to customers. So your ability to deliver to customer in any situation, any scenario. So that is what I think resilient supply chain is all about. And in the global sourcing world, and the previous panel talked about it, I believe this is the most important element. Cost has taken a backseat, as some of the people already talked about. So it is about resilient supply chain. Now, moving to sustainability, you're right. I mean, the definition for different people is different. At the company level, it covers the full gamut. And in aerospace world, The most popular thing you would have heard about is the aviation fuel. But it is about protecting the environment, health and safety, even while delivering the product to the customer. From supply chain perspective, which is what I handle, ESG definitely is an important element. But we have expanded the definition of each of these elements. So, for example, in the E world, which is environment, we are partnering with the industry groups. So most of the industry or aerospace OEMs are getting together to lay out a unified policy on how do we manage the environmental deliverables of suppliers. Health becomes important. In case of environment, before I miss this point, look at logistics. A lot of parts fly from India, and that's where the GHG emissions come into picture. So we have run several projects out of India where we have reduced the GHG emissions in logistics. That is one element of what E is all about. And then health, health and safety is absolutely critical. And then governance, it goes to the laws and regulations. So I can talk more about that, but I think that's what, sustainability to me means.
For a long time, at least for me in my learning days, what I used to catch attention from many people when they talked about environment, the first example used to be the carbon footprint from airplanes. And I would have assumed that that's probably also one of the first areas where you should be thinking about how you develop some of these focus areas and strategies.
Net zero. Net zero is the new hero. So that's what it is.
That's good. Well said. Thank you. This concept of how we think about sustainable strategies and resilience, again, because it's so unique, I will probably repeat the question to the other two gentlemen because we have different business models here at play. And I'm thinking that should bring in a different flavor of how we think about it. So, Mohan, just requesting your perspectives on that same question.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Mohan Sundaram. I am from Hyundai Motors. I'm the general manager. There's no need for any kind of much introduction about the Hyundai Motors, which everybody knows what we are in. Especially the pre-COVID and post-COVID, as well as the Suez Canal disruption and the ocean freight cost, which has spiraled close to about 400%, has taught us a lot of lessons on the resilience supply chain. So these pain points, we have taken it as a learning, and we started innovating a different strategies for us. Because the reason being, for a car to be built, it takes about, considering our production capacity, we produce 1.5 cars every minute, which is roughly translated into 2,500 cars per day. That's the capacity of us. And close to about 3,500 parts goes into one model of the car. Like that, close to about 12 to 15 models of the car in the various facets like domestic, export, left drive, all those things and all we make. You know how complex the supply chain and the parts supply will have to be factored and will have to be managed. So what we did was basically, in order to ensure there should not be any disruption and the seamless supply of parts, post-COVID, we did a backward integration to some extent wherever it is possible, not for all the parts, which is not practically possible for the automobile industry. But we did quite a substantial vertical integration, which means a lot of collaboration has happened with the various industries, and a lot of industries has come within the vicinity of Sriperumbudur on this, which made us to supply the part even post-COVID on a JIT, just in time, which is the mantra of any automobile industry. Still we practice that. Of course, the inventory level or the days have increased. The cost, of course, is also matters for us because we are in the segment of A and B segment cars. Cost is also very important for the customers in India. So considering all these factors and all, we did a backward integration as well as the vertical integration, predominantly vertical integration, which has made the supply chain resilience. In terms of we are just, or rather say like we are almost in the completion of scope 1 area. We are going into the scope 2, and the same is being calculated to our vendors also, and almost all the vendors are being sensitized how the sustainability will have to be factored in their production, in their regular operations, so that our operations are not affected. That's what we practice in terms of sustainability as well as resilience on it.
Maybe one of the most integrated industry verticals ever in terms of supply chain upwards vertical. I think there's auto is probably the North Star across different industries. Everybody aspires to be there, and auto industry is probably already there in many shapes and forms. But when you talk to many auto leaders, and like you just said, right, the opportunity to continue to do more is so much more.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. But talking to many other industries, I continue to think that auto is probably the gold standard in this entire conversation.
Exactly.
Great. Chandramohan, I'll just switch over to you. Again, I know the relevance of the question is different from your business point of view. You're also partly auto, but you'll have your own style given the agricultural footprint that you guys have and being in the top 2 or 3 players of India. How do you think about that question for your business?
Thanks, Raj, for having me in. We roughly produce, I would say, 13 to 15,000 tractors per month, and we export to more than 80 countries. Our tractors are exported to US as well as to LATAM. To my mind, if I can switch over from, let's say, sustainability to resilience first. Supply chain affects the entire gamut of the operations. For example, if you don't have a robust CRM, which is basically a good forecasting model, then to my mind, whatever supply chain you try to address, probably you may falter somewhere. So what we did was, we have a very, I wouldn't say a perfect CRM model, because no company, in my opinion, of course, the plan keeps on changing. But I think we have developed a reasonable, robust CRM. We just classify the customers in terms of hot, cold, and warm, and we know hot, actually 30 days conversion time. We produce roughly 650 models, state-wise and dealer-wise. There are some 700, 800 dealers, and of course, apart from exports. So we know broadly what exactly the models will move, and against each tractor, roughly 1,800 to 2,000 parts. We know actually which parts are required. So once we have, I wouldn't call it as again a perfect CRM, but a reasonable, good, robust model, which is almost, I would say, 80-90% accurate. We were able to predict basically, what is required from the supplier, and through a very good, I would say, backhand SAP for HANA, we were able to push it to the suppliers as far as delivery is concerned through the supply chain, and therefore we were able to monitor. And to that extent, I think it helped all the vendors to remove a great amount of uncertainty. So that is what helped us. Apart from the factor, for example, we do a continuous demand planning, meaning that dynamic planning. For example, we know most of the times we compete with, let's say, high commercial vehicles, because the castings are required for both. So how do we really alternate between the suppliers when the demand for them goes up as well as for us? And similarly, we know that certain parts of the country get into some issues in brewing sometimes. So, over a period of time, we've been able to factor all this, put it into our system, not just by intuition, but by systemic process. I think we were able to address greatly to the supplier a resilient issue, even though, of course, it is a continuous challenge, particularly when you move from tier 1 to tier 4 to tier 5, where the issues are a little different. Coming back to sustainable, of course, in terms of efficiency, I would like to say we are more inefficient than Hyundai, because we produce only, but tractor requires 4 minutes to produce as compared to 1.5 minutes in the car. So coming back to, I would say, sustainability, as they say, Hyundai said, that we are also now in the early stages, if you want to call it as from a capital point of view, from angel fund. So, from a point of sustainability, I would say we are still in stage 1, scope 2. But then in terms of, I would say, internally we have done lots of work, whether it is air or water or pollution or power. We've done lots of work internally, benchmarked very clearly. ACO, for example, where we have a good stake, we benchmark with them, we benchmark with our number 1 competitor, and we simply say that while we are not the best, we have improved significantly. For example, I think we would have been one of the first tractor company to move the tractors by train to Rajasthan. So that has saved a huge amount of cost as well as amount of fuel. We have been requesting the government that look, the inland water also, because it's the cheapest mode of transport available, and if it is well connected, which we know as of now it is not well connected, we certainly would like to make this effort. So therefore, I think in terms of sustainability, these are the measures we have taken. Recyclable packaging, we have done a lot with vendors. Reused batteries, we simply ensure that it is collected back and then ensure it's properly disposed of. So I think we are there, but we have some way to go.
I predominantly come from an IT world, and a majority of my career has been at Microsoft. So when you talked about being able to predict, talking to many customers, one of the biggest focus areas has been around prediction, being able to understand what's around the corner. But to be genuinely at an organizational scale, to be able to get there and make it real on the ground is not a joke. And of course, it's a journey. And if you're already on that journey and hearing it from a tractor company, I think that speaks volumes. Listening to all three of you, I kind of just picked up my second question, which I would like to get into, is if you can go 2-3 clicks more deeper. If I take the Boeing's example, you talked about how single supplier sources are very critical, and it's important, it's imperative for your business to make them resilient. What I would love to understand is, what are some of your best practices going into the depth of making it resilient? And let's also use the word sustainable, but I'm not using it from the lens of a ESG or an environment. I'm using it from the lens of, how do I sustain what I have started in terms of keeping these guys resilient? In other words, what you've started as a great initiative, what are some of your best practices to make sure it continues to be done at organizational scale, at factory scale? If you could kind of help share that. And sorry, last part of the question, because I'll be mindful, then it'll give us enough time across the board. The last part of this question is, how do you recognize these supply chain partners who work with you and help you meet your priorities or goals around resilience and being sustainable? How do you recognize them differently? What does that mean for them to be invested into what you are doing? Because what you're doing is what you're doing. Equal success is only going to come when they're equally invested. So how do you make sure you get that?
I was thinking of, your question was best practice. It could be from India itself. Our supply base in India is operating at a very high level of performance. Over 99.9% delivery on time, and then very high level of quality. But every day is a new day. So I think the first step, and we try to keep it simple. The first step is an understanding at the leadership level of supply base that the world is very competitive and performance is what matters. And gone are the days when you can say there is a force majeure condition, so I'm not able to deliver and so forth. So the question is, what's your value proposition and how do you differentiate yourself versus thousands of suppliers across the globe? As long as you understand that, the definition of resilience and the way they understand from the customer standpoint becomes very simple. The second part is, very healthy operations. A supplier can be resilient if their operations are healthy. So fundamentals, from finance to operations to the processes, they all have to be healthy. Now, it doesn't happen when you go to a new supplier. Even in the case where there is a sole supplier and you still have some level of maturity, there is always some gap. So what we have done, you talked about best practice, and it looks a little odd, what I'm going to tell you, but I asked the suppliers to build that level of inefficiency in the plan. So what happens is that throws a cycle time which is inflated, that equates to a cost which is higher than what the optimal cost is. But it does not impact the customer requirement. So from the customer lens, you are trustworthy, you are resilient, but your operations have to be healthy as well. So how do you get there? So you start working on the continuous improvement. So you start taking out the waste from the system. There are different tools. Lean Six Sigma is one of them. Boeing has something called BPSM, which is Boeing problem solving model. We train the suppliers on them. Once you start becoming better and better in your operations, start getting healthy and trustworthy, then you also look at the inventory level. Inventory, somebody said in the previous panel, is not something which is bad. It protects you, but you're moving from just in time to just in case. In case something happens. It's very common in India, there are strikes. It's very common that there is a shutdown, something happens, and pandemic of course was global. So you start working on those elements, whether you have to have the right level of inventory. I still remember in the COVID period, logistics was one of the things which nobody thought would be a problem. You deliver the part on time from the factory, but it reaches late in our factory in the US. So the logistics was so predictable. So what did we do? We start tracking the actual cycle time. And if you plot the curve, like, what's the variation? The span was like 120 days. How do you solve for a problem where your logistics is like 120 days apart? So we started looking at the better ways of doing that too. And lastly, apart from what you do to make your operations healthy, you have to get to a point where you start predicting and reacting proactively. And we make a lot of decisions. I make a lot of decisions on the gut feel. And very often they are true because you're basing that on certain data in mind. So as long as you're able to predict to the best of your knowledge and adapt and flexible, you can change some of the things at the last minute. And these are all the things that have helped us stay 99.9% on time to the business. And that is what resilience is. Now to your second question on how do we recognize suppliers? I think your recognition as an award. Globally we award 9 suppliers out of thousands of suppliers every year. And we have been having at least one supplier from India over the last 3-4 years. And trust me, it's like an Oscar kind of a ceremony that happens in the States. Performance is definitely one of the major factors. Sustainability, to your point, is getting very, very important. Cost, quality, delivery, customer interaction, communication, there's a number of factors that go into it. Our suppliers are getting there. So it's no longer cost, and we're talking in the networking session, it is about a rounded value proposition that you present. Supply chain resilience is one of them, sustainability is one of them, and this value proposition will keep going up from India.
Thanks, Ashwini. I think that one word you said probably sums it up. How do you make sure it's a rounded value prop? And it's not just strong on supplies, it's not just strong on resilience, it's not just strong on sustainability, it's healthy, it's being rewarded. I think it's a well-rounded end-to-end kind of thought about scenario. So Mohan, they're 3 unique businesses, so I tend to ask the same question, so pardon me for that. But I think there's depth and there's insight which is coming out from each business model, and thereby the repeat of the same question. How do you think about keeping it sustainable on the resilience practices? What are your best practices? And probably if you can go a little extra in terms of how you define the health of resilience, how do you measure it? Yeah. And of course, how do you reward it?
Thank you, Raj. Before going into your question, let me just give you a few background about the quality what we practice in Hyundai Motors. The car which is being produced there are equally being exported also. The parts are same. In the similar line, in the same line, both the domestic cars will be produced and export cars will be produced. You will have a left-hand drive, you will have LHT, RST, petrol, diesel, and the different variants. The normally car which you see is only one model in the car, but there are 400 variants in the car for a model. Say for example, I-20 means there will be 400 variants. Then you can imagine the complexity of the parts which needs to be produced and supplied on time. That's the way we program the production schedule. All the cars are NCAP rating of 3.5 and above, which is equally one of the safest car. We can't compare it with the Volvo and other things and all, but at least to some extent with the Indian driving conditions, 3.5 and above is one of the good quality car with the NCAP rating. That's a quality which we produce. With this, there are two best practices we follow post-COVID. The reason why I'm referring post-COVID, previously we worked in a very, very ideal condition, not much of disruptions. Everything was streamlined. And as you know that the Koreans are always aggressive, or else you would not be having the share of 20 plus market share. So post-COVID, we did two best practices. One is that value chain mapping. For car to be produced, it takes about 18 months from the concept stage to the SOP stage. That's what normally it happens in any automobile industry. Simply the car is not being designed and it is not being produced commercially next month. It takes about 18 months for a car to be produced because there are various tools to be produced from various parts of the world. It has to be shipped to India for the production. And there are a lot of validation happens in various regulatory agencies like RI and other agencies and all. With this, the first practice what we did was, we identify a supplier based on various parameters like cost, delivery, capacity, all those stuffs and all. And we finalize this vendor. And equally, we also do a kind of validation for the same tool with the other vendor, so that in case if the first supplier fails, or for geopolitical reasons, for any other financial reasons or other things, we have the backup for the second, we have backup with the second vendor. We can be able to have a seamless supply of parts. This is one of the best practices we follow, so that the parts are not affected. It's a matter of a few days we can be able to get the parts from the second supplier. And the next practice is, the tools which are being developed are made for a certain process or the molds which are being produced. Whereas in this case, equally we produce a kind of accessories for the said tool, so that we can be able to move the tool from the area of problematic supplier to the less problematic supplier or the alternative supplier, so that the second supplier is also available in a fraction of days, few days or anything, so that the parts are also available on time. This is what we do on this. And Hyundai recognition is something which is phenomenal on this. Like we do it on a every quarterly basis, where the vendors are being invited to the plant, and it's been rewarded or recognized by the MD for all the quality, various parameters we have, audit process we follow. And apart from that, every year we have an annual event. Incidentally, for this year, after a gap of 2.5 years, we are going to have it on March 7th. Partnership Day, we call it as a vendor conventions, Partnership Day. And in that, first 10 vendors will be rewarded. So it's a proud moment for them to be on the stage, that too being attended by the various celebrities, not celebrities, and this is not a film from a personalities or anything, like they are all from the top-notch technocrats. It will be a good networking meeting, and they will also be rewarded in the August forum. That's what we do it.
Thanks, Mohan. I mean, looks like that's a common theme, right? At the end of the day, of all the work you do, individuals and businesses do love being recognized in some shape and form. You talked about having backup strategies for parts. I bought a car recently, a few months back. I bought a Mahindra Thar. The guy explains to me everything. I said, I love it. Here's the money. He expected me to go to a bank loan, blah, 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 1 week. I said, dude, here's the money. Give me the vehicle. He said, sir, waiting period 6 months. I said, I'll transfer it right now. He says, just wait. Comes from the manager and says, 1 hour delivery, sir. I got lucky or whatever, right? But the point here is, I got the car, but I didn't get the second key. He says, sir, you take the car today, I'll give you the second key after 6 months. Never ever heard that. Then I figured COVID has done a lot of new things. And I asked them the same question. Then I had a chat with the general manager, and I'm like, so you're really going to give me a car without my second key? Guess what? I've still not received it.
Yeah, that's a different thing. Probably I can share with you offline when we are going to have the dinner. The reason for having not given the second key. I know the reasons.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just.
If the audience are interested, probably I can share, or
The reason I brought this up, Mohan, is we're just talking about
No,
resilience.
Raj, in fact, we also follow the same thing. Initially, we had that kind of things. Now, we give both of the
Sure.
keys to them.
No, the point is how resiliency on what you do affects customer service. I know COVID's been out of our hands. It's been out of everybody's hands. You cannot do what you cannot do. But how resiliency and planning for it, I have probably only experienced one issue, whereas if you did not do everything you would have done, I would have probably experienced 80 issues. You would have brought it down to one. I'm sure there's opportunity for the industry to continue to take it down to zero and take it to a different level altogether. My point here is how interconnected experiences are with how you think about resiliency. That's what I wanted to say.
What we do in TAFE is, we actually stratify the models into repeater, stranger, and runners. Now, what we also did was a very adventurous action we took. In respect of strangers, we tried to attempt to make one sell one concept. You can imagine that when there are some 1,800 parts and they're coming from several hundreds of vendors, if you want to attempt that make one sell concept, and if you're selling all over the country, logistic being southern part of the country, and then you have to move goods to all over the country. Of course, we didn't attempt for exports, how difficult it is. But then how did we navigate or how did we manage this? We would have introduced this in several models now. Not, of course, all the models is not possible. We trained the vendors. We actually ensured that, of course, CI later on came to us, and a lot of vendors, other people also came to us and saw how did we manage it. It was a wonderful journey. We involved all the vendors and slowly taught them as to how to make it happen. So this was a great journey, and I'm glad to tell you that we were able to, I wouldn't say institutionalize, but we have made a commendable progress, and we even now continue to do this. That's step number one. Step number two, we have now started using what is called control tower, which I think most of the companies are going would be doing in a much bigger manner. We have not so far, I would say, progressed to the level which we would like to, but we have certainly progressed in the sense that we have a visibility of almost all the vendors in respect of not only their capacity but in respect of their finished goods. Now we have to move to the next level as to what is their raw material, what is their, that's what we are attempting, but that will take some time in our opinion. So the control tower concept has certainly enabled us to ensure that the inventory is controlled, not by us, but by them. Which is very, very important, because then that's the working capital as far as they're concerned. As far as best practice is concerned, what I can think of is, we introduced a very, very cost-effective digital quality management system. What we did was, it was a hub and spokes model, meaning that we have data, since we are from a software company, you will understand, data acquisition system which is only in hub, and then connected to the router, and then through the internet, to the mobile. We captured all the quality parameters at the line of the vendors, and then started tracking it, and therefore our quality guys can see it in the mobile. And therefore, we have introduced it for almost most of the vendors now, I would say. And several hundreds of parameters were introduced. Now we are also now beginning to roll over for end of the line parameters. And therefore, we were able to reduce of course the PPM was just certainly lower, but we were able to reduce for these vendors to as low as 27 PPM. So you can imagine that how this helps the supplier, this helps us also to control the quality. So this is one of the, I would say, best practices which were introduced, apart from the robotic process automation which were introduced from, I would say, procurement to pay. I don't want to get into the details of that. As far as vendor recognition is concerned, I can tell you very, I would say, I don't want to use the word proudly, but maybe as a matter of fact, we ensure that the payment to the vendors is always made on time. Okay, and we know for certain that if their working capital is impacted, then the business will be impacted. So, in fact, way back around 2006 or something, I don't remember exactly, because we go through always some, industry is cyclical. When we wanted to expand after the period of, let's say downturn, the vendors were not willing to invest. Basically because, how do I invest in downturn, which has just come out of the downturn. What we did was, those time, not compared to your $220 billion which you mentioned, we advanced 50, 60 crores, 70 crores. We participated in the debenture issue, we participated in the preference capital issue, we gave a huge number of loans which were deducted over a period of time, adjusted to the supply. And there was a huge amount of, I would say, not only satisfaction, but a great amount of loyalty was created because they know TAFE will go out of the way to support, because these loans were recorded over a period of 4 to 5 years. But then this was, I would say, a practice which they know, the vendors know that if there is an issue, they can come to us for support. Like other companies, we also have a vendor rating system, and most of the vendors, not I would say, no, I don't think, I have not heard any from any vendor, dissatisfied vendor. They'll all come and say that, look, sir, you are different, we would love to work with you. We would love to work with you basically because we build long-term relationship. To my mind, whatever resilience you build through digital, because we have got some spend analytics, etc., we're moving towards, as I told you, control tower. But all these are all, I would say, steps. But if you don't get the trust of the vendor, if you don't create the transparency, if you don't share with them what are your issues, therefore they supported us even in a downturn, because they know very well that even in downturn, TAFE is not going to maybe a huge some days of delay, but they know they'll get the payment. So if you build a relationship with them on a long-term basis, then whatever you spoke about sustainability and resilience automatically follows, in my opinion. So the trust and the transparency, sharing of information, working with them. For example, new products. We have created a virtual platform now where our designers work with their designers. And over a period of time, I think we introduced this only a couple of years back, but then over a period of time, it has created a great amount of, I would say, not only cost efficiency, but also time efficiency. We're able to compress the time to build. So I think, if we start working with the partners, we call them partners in progress, we don't call them as vendors, and that actually over a period of time.
Thank you, Chandra. I think your continued theme, you started with CRM as one example and predictability, and how you are leveraging digital and different shapes and forms to enable stuff. I think that's massive. I know we're on time's up. I would like to just take a minute and put out one other extra example that strongly comes to my mind, something I personally learned from. So at C2FO, one thing we've done with many companies or many customers that we worked across is, hey, how and what is it that we can do differently with your supply chain? Right? You all want to provide liquidity, working capital, that's great, but what is it that we can do differently that could genuinely add value back into the ecosystem and contribute to this word of being resilient? So we did one experiment with Walmart, and Walmart globally works with us in many countries. Almost all countries they operate in, they work with us. So one thing we co-designed with them is they had different priorities of how they think about their supply chain. So like one thing which was important for them was diversity and inclusion. So any women-owned enterprises had a different mechanism in their mind. Anything which was, so they had a scaling mechanism. Here are large companies, medium and small. How they think about these different sizes was different. Then they had critical supplies, anything which is central. So, hey, you're a supplier belonging to a category business of mine, which means you're supplying something which I'm actually selling back in my stores. That's critical for me because it's related to my top line growth. So how do I think about you as a core raw material is different, and thereby my rating mechanisms are different. Hey, you're a logistics provider, you are an intelligence provider, you are providing some other warehousing or something else for me to make my periphery services more efficient. So in simple words, they had a complex chart and what these different categories of suppliers meant to them. So we developed a rating mechanism like many other companies in the world are doing. We worked and partnered with a rating agency, and then we said, allow us to run markets for you where if, let's say, a woman-owned enterprise is coming and asking you for liquidity against invoices that you pay, what would you do differently? They're like, if it's a woman-owned enterprises, I will not accept pay terms more than 45 days. And they would like to pay them in case there is an early pay request. They would like to do so if the market is operating at, let's say, 6% in the United States and let's say 5% in Europe. They would like to give it at a 2% cheaper than the market. And that was their way of recognizing women-owned enterprises. If it's a small business, they had a different package. If it's a a critical supplier for category business, and it's a very critical to top line and sales in some of their store businesses. The way they gave the ratings were different, and everybody else they have the main path which would come at normal market competitive rates, right? But that was something they've done in complementary with some of the other strategies that we talked about. Actually, that became an industry best practices, not just with us, but with Walmart. I think they're known to be the global leader at doing something like this in that space. We've seen companies like Costco, we've seen companies like Amazon, I've seen a lot of other companies, Unilever, Colgate Palmolive, they've adapted something very similar to take it down the way. So anyway, I just wanted to put out that one extra idea in complementary to what I've heard from all of you. So thank you very much for being here and sharing some of your stuff. I've definitely learned of you. I've taken some notes. Maybe I'll continue to work with you to see if we can learn more in that space. So thank you very much, and thank you for your evening.
I think it has been a great day, I would say, of insights, discussions. We've heard pundit perspectives from different industries. I would say we've touched all areas of supply chain. Even though it was a fintech-related topic, I'm sure you would agree, we've heard perspectives from a supply chain initiative. I would say a reward category of how vendors are looked at across the globe. And in fact, when we strongly say that we did close to $78 billion last year, what moves us really is, we've created jobs across the world. Each rupee saved or each rupee made for a corporate or company, it's like jobs created across the world. So that is what moves us each and every day. At C2FO, it's a daily affair. We touch businesses across the world, be it small, mid-tail, long-tail suppliers. And that's the way in which we run businesses. So thank you very much for all the perspectives. I'm very sure going forward we'll be collaborating in the days ahead for more perspectives. We would like to learn the best practices which each industry carries across the world. And so thank you very much, and looking forward to more discussions in the days to come. Thank you.